before I hand things off to Joanna to go a little bit deeper into how you think about empathy, what we wanted to do is really make sure that we're helping to highlight that it's important to get the right point of empathy with the customer in your organization. So again, helping, because empathy needs to be done in context, right? I think everybody's experienced situations where it feels forced when you're maybe at a retail store, or if you're engaging with a frontline employee in a different situation. And we want to make sure that we're helping people understand what is the right use of empathy. And that does require a deeper understanding of the customer sentiment, the effort, the emotion that they have, what their intent is, and even interacting with you and what they're trying to get done. And then how you take that information and bring that to life for the rest of the organization is really critical, as well as thinking about how does that not only drive continuous improvement, but also innovation, right? How are you really helping your employees think about that as they move forward in their roles? And ultimately empowering them, right, to act on what they need to, not only to solve an issue, but to continue to innovate within your business. All right, so now I'm going to pass it off to Joanna to go much deeper into the concept of empathy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Koren. And I think so many of the things that you've mentioned are such good examples of why empathy is so good, but also where we can actually create that spark of empathy within the organization, right? Talking about data sources, but also, of course, talking about the importance of bringing that empathy to life within the organization, and also reaching that right point of empathy, as you mentioned. So when we set off on this research project to take a new look at empathy, right? Empathy is not a new topic. It's a topic that people have been talking about for a long time. But uh, it's what we wanted to understand and to see is empathy as the art of stepping imaginatively into the shoes of another person, which does require information about their context, their intent, what are they doing, which channels are they using, etc. But also understanding, of course, their feelings, their perspectives, and then using that understanding to guide actions, right? That's really what we wanted to get to. Is the empathy, of course, is the foundation, but how do we drive action from that? How do we make sure that people know what to do with that? So we also highlighted, or we came across quite a number of perils, if you like, of empathy, right? So there's nuance. There's a lot of nuance to empathy, right? We want to make sure that we understand, as you mentioned, the right point of empathy. And understanding the right point of empathy requires us to acknowledge that empathy can sometimes be speculative when we lack context, right? If you look at this picture that you see here, there's, you know, this lady draped on this green sofa. She's holding something in her hand. She could be tired. She could be melancholy. She could be nauseous. It could be the middle of a heat wave, right? We don't know what's happening to her. When we lack that context, we become speculative about what might actually be happening in her life at this moment. Actually, funnily enough, the title of this painting here is called After the Ball. So she's just been dancing at a ball. She's tired, her feet are hurting, and what she's holding in her hand is actually her dance card, which is full. She probably has had a delightful evening. And knowing that context changes our perception entirely of how we read this painting. And the reason I use a painting is because art is really good at stimulating empathy, right? But it also helps illustrate that empathy can be speculative, it can be selective. We might find it difficult to actually empathize with this particular lady draped on this luxuriant green sofa because we don't own a luxuriant green sofa, or because she lives in a past century. She wears clothing we wouldn't normally wear, right? So we might have difficulty. She's not in our in group. Empathy can also sometimes feel incapacitating. Koren, you mentioned, of course, the experience in the call center. These are, people, heroes within our organizations that spend day in, day out talking to customers. And it can sometimes become incapacitating when we enter empathic distress or empathic fatigue, for instance, right? Now we know that she's been dancing all night. We might actually feel a little bit less empathy for her. So empathy can also be dehumanizing, right? When we fall into judgment, for instance. And you mentioned this a little while back. empathy needs to be situationally appropriate, right? Sometimes a lot of people struggle with the concept of empathy and efficiency, and they tend to think that these two things are at odds with each other. And actually, they're not. Sometimes the most empathetic thing to do is to actually deliver an efficient experience to a customer. Or in this case, perhaps what she's longing for is a glass of water, right? So we need to be situationally appropriate, or maybe to just be left alone, right? So we need to understand that context. We need to understand more about the story in order to be able to empathize. And those pieces, those data sources that you mentioned, are such rich sources of this fuller, more holistic story that really helps us avoid these perils of empathy. So in understanding that, there are these perils, this right point of empathy is absolutely essential. So this concept of really correcting for biases, knowing what the full story is so that we can reach this right point of empathy. And so what we found in our research is that in order to really drive this right point of empathy within the organization, we need to do a whole host of things, a whole number of things. And I want to take you through a little bit of a framework that we have created around creating empathy within your organizations to drive innovation, to drive change, to find and fix problems for customers.